All right, everyone, welcome back from this lengthy, I would say, break. For some of you, it was lunch break. For some of you, it wasn't, but it is what it is. That's the power of global virtual or online events, let's call them. So welcome back to the storytelling track. Our next session is by Mr. Paul Smith, who is going to be talking about, and we are going to continue the conversation around storytelling, and he's going to be sharing with you which are the top stories, the top type of stories that you have to have in your arsenal, as I already mentioned. So just to give you some context around who our next speaker is, he's one of the world's leading experts in the storytelling field. One of his books is right there, yep, right there, and he has 4 more. All right, so he has in total 5 books written on the topic of storytelling. His work was featured in Times, Forbes, more or less, you name it. It was featured there. So, Paul, I think I need to stop here and give the floor to you. Welcome.
Very, very good. Yes, thanks for having me. Congratulations on your whole conference. I hear it's going very well. So, yeah, let's dive right in. And the first topic I want to cover is what is a story? When I talk about leadership storytelling or business storytelling or sales or marketing storytelling, what do I mean? And I mean kind of an old school definition of story. So I literally mean a narrative about something that happened to someone, as opposed to some people use the word storytelling and they mean different things like, our brand logo tells a story, our mission statement tells a story, you know, that speech was a great story. They might be, but probably not. That's probably just a good brand logo and a good speech. You can have great logos and speeches without stories. So when I talk about storytelling, though, I do literally mean starting with a story. So as such, there'll be a time, a place, a main character. That main character will have a goal. There'll usually be an obstacle or a barrier getting in the way of that goal, a villain, if you will. And there'll be events that transpire along the way and hopefully resolve themselves nicely in the end. Okay, so that's what I mean by a story. In fact, let me give you an example so you can see in a more concrete way what I mean. And one of my favorite examples comes from a guy named Sherrod Madison, who is the CEO of United Building Maintenance. So it's a commercial cleaning company. So these are the folks that come in and clean your offices at night. Now, when he has a sales call on a new prospective client, he almost always does the same thing. I mean, he has a real, sales meeting with them, and he brings his vice president of sales. But he almost always finds an opportunity to share a story during the meeting. And the story he typically tells them is about what he does when he signs on a new client. He says, it's always the same. There's typically a 30-day transition period between the time when I take over or when I sign the contract and my company takes over. And he says, during that 30 days, I always do the same thing. I sneak into the building in the middle of the night to see how they're cleaning it now. Now, it's probably not as nefarious as I just made it sound because, of course, he gets permission to do this. But what he's looking for is how are they cleaning it today? Are the employees well trained? Are they well equipped to do their job? Because at the end of the month, when his company takes over, he's going to inherit those employees. They're typically contract employees. So he said, for example, last week, we took over the Verizon building in New Jersey. And so at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm in the building looking around and I see this guy vacuuming the carpets. And he's using the same kind of residential quality, vacuum cleaner that I use at home. And he said, now the problem is, what you got to understand is that those corridors are 12 feet wide and a half a mile around. It's going to take the guy a month just to vacuum the carpets one time. So also, it's not going to do a very good job, and it's going to break down every 2 or 3 weeks because it's just not made for that kind of volume of usage. So when we took over, we put him into a triple wide commercial grade vacuuming machine that'll do a much better job in a fraction of the time. Plus, that thing's going to last forever. So then I went to the next floor and I found a guy shampooing the carpets. And it's the same kind of story. He was using the same kind of residential quality walk behind squeeze bottle shampooer that I use at home. And same problem. So when we took over, we put him into an industrial grade riding shampooer that'll do a much better job in a fraction of the time. Plus, notice this gets that guy off of his feet, which means I have fewer workman's comp injury issues, which means my client has fewer injury issues. The last thing I wanted to check was I wanted to see how they were dusting the offices. So I went up one more floor and I looked on top of all the file cabinets and I saw the same thing on top of all of them. I saw a little half a moon swiped out on top. And he said, I know exactly what that means, and you probably do too. So it's not that the people cleaning were lazy, right? It's just that they literally weren't tall enough to reach the back of the 5.5 foot tall, 3 foot deep file cabinets. So that they couldn't reach all the way back. And that's what left that half a moon swiped out on top. And that's what makes it obvious that it's not being cleaned properly. So when we took over, we just gave everybody these little 18-inch extension wands for their dust cloths so they could reach the back. Problem solved. Now, during that sales call, he could simply tell them what his 3 key differentiating characteristics are. He could say, well, you know, the reason we're better than our competitors is that we use triple wide industrial grade vacuuming machines. We use commercial grade riding shampooers, and I give all my office cleaners 18-inch extension wands for the dust cloths, and that's why we're better. And probably on his brochure, it says that somewhere. But in a conversation with a human being, he prefers to tell the story about that instead of just giving them the list. So a sales pitch is a list of reasons why you should buy what I'm selling. But a story, will communicate the same 3 things, but in a much better fashion, because, just hearing that story, you can see in your mind's eye, that guy riding around on that shampooer like the Zamboni driver at the ice skating rink, right? You can see in your mind's eye somebody easily reaching the back of the file cabinets and not leaving it dusty. So it leaves a more human, visceral, memorable way of whatever it is that you're trying to convince people of. So the story does a much better job than just the list. Okay, so that's what I mean by a story. Now, why do I think you should probably be telling more stories than you are? So here are my top 6 reasons. There are dozens of others. The most important one, though, is that it helps people make decisions. And that's your job in the business world as a leader, as a marketer, as an engineer, whatever you do, your job is to help people make better decisions, your company and other companies. And stories help people make decisions because it reaches the subconscious emotional processing part of the brain that normal conversation doesn't. When you tell people very rationally and logically why they should do something, that only affects one part of the brain. Storytelling reaches both parts, and it turns out human decisions are made more often in the subconscious emotional processing part of the brain, and then we rationalize those decisions in the rational conscious thinking part of the brain. So if you want to be as influential as you can, you need to tell stories so you can reach both parts of the brain. But there are other reasons as well. I mean, storytelling is timeless. It's always worked and it always will. It's demographic proof. I've taught this class all over the world. I've yet to meet a group of people who are not affected by a great story. Stories make things contagious, meaning they spread by word of mouth, right? You tell a good story and it will spread, all over your world, however big your world is, all on its own. That's how storytelling works. Stories make things easier to remember also. So literally, there have been a number of studies that show that facts are between 6 and 22 times more likely to be remembered if they're embedded in a story than if they're just given to people in a list. But you don't have to believe any of the studies because I can prove it to you right now just with this observation. That is that all of you sitting here right now know that by this time tomorrow, none of you are going to remember this list of 6 things, right? And it's okay. I'm not going to be insulted, right? Every time I teach it, I have to look at the list of 6 things because it's just a list of 6 things. But all of you sitting there right now know that by this time tomorrow, you will remember the story of the guy cleaning the offices, right? And going out through all the rooms and seeing how they're cleaning the offices. And next week and next month and a year from now, most of you will be able to tell that story and get most of the facts right. But none of you are going to remember this list of 6 things, right? That's the power of a good story. And then last, stories inspire. Slides don't. I mean, when's the last time you heard somebody say, wow, you'll never believe the PowerPoint presentation I just saw? Like, nobody says that. And you won't say that at the end of mine. But people do say that about a good story. And I think you want your leadership messages to have that quality. Okay, when do I think you should be telling stories? And my first answer to that is, it's not all the time, okay? In fact, if I had to put a number to it, and I will, it's only about 10 to 15% of the time. So meaning if you had a 1-hour meeting with somebody, 10 to 15% of the time is about 6 to 9 minutes. So 6 to 9 minutes out of that hour, you might be telling stories or 2 or 3 stories. See, these stories are only 2 or 3 minutes long. So you might tell 2 or 3 2 to 3 minute stories over the course of that hour, and that's all you need. And quite frankly, of that hour, that's what most people are going to remember anyway. A year later, if you ask somebody to remember what you talked about during that meeting, odds are they're not going to remember your bullet points or your recommendations or your slides, but they might remember 1 or 2 of the stories that you told. And so these are going to be the most powerful things that you say during that hour. So you're going to want to communicate them in the form of a story. Okay, more specifically, what kind of stories should you tell? Okay, and there are lots, dozens and dozens of types of business stories. I want to give you my list of top 10. Okay, so if you're new to storytelling, this is probably the 10 that you should start with. You should expand beyond this, but if you're looking for a place to start, here are the most important 10. And the first 4 go together because they're about setting the direction for the organization. So that's where we came from. So that's a founding story. Why we can't stay there. So that's a case for change story. Where we're going, which is a vision story, and how we're going to get there, which is a strategy story. Because a strategy is about how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to be. So just imagine you can tell those 4 stories to your organization. You're much more likely to get them to go where you want them to go because you can explain to them in compelling human storytelling form where we came from, why we can't stay there, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. All right. Now, the next 4 go together as well, but they're more about who we are as an organization. So that's what we believe. So that's a corporate values story. Who we serve. So that's a customer story, a story about the customer. So, so that everybody can have a personal, human, visceral understanding of who it is that we're ultimately working for. What we do for our customers, that's number 7. So I call that a classical sales story. It's a story about what you do that's so awesome, people should pay you money to do it. And then number 8 is how we're different from our competitors. And I call that a marketing story because it's generally the marketing department's job to differentiate you from your competitors. But notice, by the way, the story I told you about the guy in the sales call explaining how his company cleans offices, that was an example of that, right? And that explains how his company does what they do differently than the way other companies might clean your offices. Those are the 3 key differentiating characteristics that he explained throughout the story. So that was an example of number 8 here. But there are 2 more, if you're keeping track, in the top 10, 9 and 10, but those are more personal to you, the leader. So number 9 is why I lead the way I do. So that's a personal leadership philosophy story. All right. And number 10 is why you should want to work here. Not you, but you, whoever you're talking to, right? So that's a recruiting story because every leader's job is to bring in talented people into the organization and have them stay and follow your leadership. All right, now a couple of things I want you to notice about this list. First of all, this is a list for any leader in any functional discipline in an organization. Okay, so like number 7 happens to be a sales story. Okay, if you work in sales, you need lots of sales stories, okay, dozens. But if you work in any other department, you still need 1. You need to be able to explain to people what your company does for your customers, all right? If you can't, you really don't know what your company does, all right? Number 8, like I said, is a marketing story. If you work in marketing, you need dozens of those. But if you work in any other department, you at least need to be able to tell 1. Okay, same with a recruiting story. It's not just the job of the HR department. Everybody needs at least 1 good recruiting story. So if you're looking for a place to start in storytelling, I would recommend these. And I've already given you an example of one of them, that number 8, how we're different from our competitors. I think I want to give you one more example just to give you a feel for these stories, and then I want to get into how to craft them. So the other one I want to share with you is number 9. So how I lead the way I do, or why I lead the way I do story. So this is a personal leadership philosophy story that explains why it is that you lead the way you do, how you've become the leader that you are today. And the example I want to share with you is about a guy named Mike, who happens to be the guy in that picture straddling that gun turret. So he was his first leadership opportunity was in the military. And it was actually just in a training exercise, okay? So he happened to be leading a platoon of tanks, guys working in tanks, and they were doing this training exercise. There were going to be 400 tanks on one side of the field versus 400 tanks on the other side of this field. Now, they're not going to shoot live ordnances at each other, obviously, so they've just equipped their gun turrets with little laser pointers and receivers on the other end so that they would know who got, virtually shot. So it was basically a giant game of laser tag, but with real tanks. So Mike happened to be assigned to be the leader of the first tank that was going to go into battle on his side of the field, with 399 other tanks in wedge formation behind him against 400 tanks on the other side. So, of course, the night before the exercise, he sits down with the commanding officer and they look at a map of the terrain and figure out where the high ground is so they'll have the best odds of winning the exercise. Well, the next morning, the exercise starts. Mike's in his tank. They're racing out onto the field. he gets about a mile or so into this field, and he's got to make his first decision, first leadership decision of his career. Turn right or turn left, and he just doesn't know what to do, right? Apparently, looking at a battlefield through the crack in the hatch of a tank that's bouncing up and down at 40 miles an hour, it just looks different than it does on a map in a conference room. So Mike has a decision to make. Option one, he can stop the tank, turn the light on, get the map out, figure out the right thing to do, which might take, 30 seconds. Or option two, he could just guess. Well, Mike chose option two. He yelled out, "Driver, turn left." So the driver turns left. Well, a few minutes later, the light inside his tank starts flashing, which means you just got shot by a laser. You're virtually dead. So they had to stop the tank and pop the hatch and get out. Those guys are done for the day. Well, of course, a few seconds later, the second tank turns left right behind them because that's their job, follow the leader. Well, and then their light starts flashing. Well, tank number 3 turns left behind the other one, and their light starts flashing. But the guys in tank number 4 saw 3 tanks turn left and get virtually shot and killed. They realized that was a mistake. So tank number 4 turned right. And then 396 other tanks turned right. They took the high ground and won the exercise. Now, Mike made a mistake that day. He turned left when he should have turned right, but he learned a valuable leadership lesson from it, which is this. Sometimes it's better to make the wrong decision quickly than to make the right decision slowly. Okay, so just imagine what would have happened if Mike had chosen option 1 and stopped the tank and looked at the map. There would have been 400 tanks lined up getting picked off one at a time. Okay, by turning left instead of right quickly, it became obvious pretty soon that that was a mistake, right? Life, business, war, they're all similar in that when you make a mistake, life has a way of letting you know, and then you can monitor and adjust. So Mike chose option 1 to find out quickly if it was the right decision or not, and they found out quickly. Now, that doesn't mean that every time you should just be guessing. But what it is, it's a cautionary tale that sometimes in business we get stuck in analysis paralysis. For months, we'll be trying to figure out what to do while our competition is moving forward. Okay, so a good way to come up with a story like this of your own is just to ask yourself, what was the biggest leadership mistake that you ever made, and what did you learn from it? And those become great leadership stories to help other people not only learn what kind of leadership to expect from you, but to learn a leadership lesson themselves that they may want to adopt for their own leadership. So that's an example of number 9. So now the 10 I gave you were 10 leadership stories. There are lots of sales and marketing type stories as well, which I don't have time to go through today. I'll share this link, and Boris, I'll send you this so you can put it on your site somewhere. If people want to look at what the 25 most important sales stories are, I'll be happy to let people peruse through that and see examples of them. We just don't have time to go through them, but there are lots of different stories that you're going to want to add to your repertoire as a business leader. Okay, I want to move on to how to craft these stories. And probably the first and most important thing that I need to cover with you is the structure. Good stories have a structure. Great stories have a great structure. Lousy stories don't have any structure at all. They're a rambling, run-on mess. And you know this when you see it because people will start telling a story and 10 minutes later, they're still trying to tell the story and they're fumbling through it. Right? These stories are only supposed to be 2 or 3, 4 minutes long. You need a tight structure in order to get through it. And here's what I recommend. Okay? And you don't have to remember the names of these sections: context, challenge, conflict resolution. But remember the questions that I have on the list here. And again, and Boris, if I haven't already, I'd be happy to send you a 1-page summary of these techniques that you can share with people so they don't have to take notes too fast. But there are 8 questions your story needs to answer, and you should answer them in this order. And the first question is, why should I listen to this story? Okay, that's a question you need to answer for your audience. Why should they bother listening to you for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes to tell your story? And if you don't give them a good reason right up front to listen to your story, they might not. They might not listen to your story. So that's why the first question you have to answer is, why should I bother listening to your story? Okay, and the way that you do that, by the way, is you just say something like, wow, that's a tough problem that you're having. Let me tell you what I did the last time I ran into that problem when I had your job. Okay? That's all you got to do. Now they want to listen to your story. Now notice you haven't told them what happened, and you didn't tell them how you navigated the situation, and you didn't tell them if it went well or if it was a dismal failure. They're going to find those things out when you tell them the story. That first sentence or two just lets them know, oh, if I listen to you for the next couple of minutes, I'm going to learn something that's important to me. Not to you, but to me. I'm going to learn something that I want to know by listening to your story. And now you have a captive audience. Okay, so that's the purpose of that first question. So once you've done that adequately, you've earned the right to answer the next 5 questions. And here they are. Where and when did it take place? Who's the main character and what did they want? What was the problem or opportunity they ran into? What did they do about it? And how did it turn out in the end? Okay, now that should sound like the natural flow of a story, because of course it is the natural flow of a story. But you notice there's 2 left. What did you learn from it? And what do you think I should go do now? So that I, the person you're talking to. So that's your opportunity to draw a conclusion and make a recommendation. So notice the first question is to get their attention and get them to want to listen to your story. The last 2 questions are to derive a conclusion and a recommended action, to drive action on their part. The middle 5 questions are actually the story. Okay, that's where the actual story takes place. But the first question and the last 2 questions are a necessary part of the storytelling if you're going to accomplish some objective with the story and not just entertain people. Okay, and all of these stories are important. And the order kind of matters too, right? Like answering that question number 2, where and when does it take place? That actually lets people know that it's a true story they're listening to, right? You know, if I were to tell you, a story about, 2 years ago when this certain thing happened to me in New York City, well, you naturally assume that it's a true story because I told you exactly where and when it happened. If I don't tell you or if I tell you once upon a time in a land far away, well, now you know it's a made up story. But if I don't answer the question at all, people don't know if it's true or not. And that bothers people. People have a natural tendency to want to know if the story they're listening to is fact or fiction. And if you don't tell them, it distracts them throughout the story. So that's a question you need to answer at the beginning. Question number 6 needs to happen at the end. How did it turn out? All right. When you're making a presentation, you often lead with your recommendation. You lead with the end, and then you go back and fill in the details. And that's fine just for a presentation. But when you get to the point in the presentation where you're telling a story, don't give away the end of the story at the beginning of the story. That's not how storytelling works, right? If you give away the ending of the story, people have no interest in listening to your story. Okay, so storytelling happens in this particular order. Okay, now also ideally, I would say you're answering questions 1 through 6. The audience, you want to answer questions 7 or 8. Okay, you're going to take a pause. I'll cover that a little bit more in a minute, but let me give you a little bit of insight into question number 5. What did they do about it? That is the most important story in storytelling. It is the heart and the soul of storytelling. It's where the hero actually does battle with the villain, per se. And Boris, we're about to show the first video. So I want you to watch this video. It's a 2-minute video. It's an advertisement, but I want you to think of it not as an advertisement, but think of it as just a story. And ask yourself this question as you're listening and watching this story. What % of the time in this story is the main character doing something about the problem that he had? 10%, 20%, 50%? What % of the time is in this story is addressing question number 5? What did the main character do about the problem? So Boris, can we run that first video, please?
Evening.
Evening.
May I ring that up for you?
Yes, please.
Have a good evening.
Repeat after me. A.
A.
Then
B.
and C.
C.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
No, not good. Not good.
Just the sounds that words make.
Cat.
Dog.
Calamari. Yeah.
Trash. On the beach.
Oh. Good, good.
Farm fresh. My son and I mowed the grass.
star.
Unbelievable.
Dad,
Hey, Tubbs, I read your book.
you read my book. Barman, give that man a belt.
Okay, we have the video number 1. Back to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so let's just analyze the story real quickly. So obviously the main character is the older gentleman. The problem is that he can't read. He's got a really good reason to learn to read. It turns out his son has written a book. You don't find that out until the end, which is a nice surprise ending, and I'll teach you how to do that in a minute. But question number 5 is, what did the main character do about the problem? Well, what he did about it was he learned to read, okay? I mean, learning to read is hard enough as a kid. It's super hard as an adult. And the answer to the question that I asked you to think about, what percent of the time in that story was him doing something about his problem, was about 80%. Most of that story was him struggling to learn to read. And that's why it was such an interesting story. Like, imagine if telling that story, they just kind of cut to the chase, which we often try and do in storytelling. Well, let me just cut to the chase. It would have sounded like this. Hey, there's this guy who couldn't read and his son wrote a book. So he learned to read and he read his son's book. Yay! It would have just been a terrible story, right? It's the struggle, the main character's struggle against a villain that makes stories interesting. So don't get cheap with that part. It's not uncommon for about half, 50 to 60%. Now, 80% in that one's a little bit high, but 50 to 60% is not uncommon of the time in a story to be addressing the question, what did the main character do about the problem? Okay, let's move on to. I want to give you another video. Boris, we're going to show that second video, and this one is going to help you understand how it turned out in the end. So I want you to ask yourself, how did they know it was okay to end the story where they ended the story? And after you see this, I'll explain how they were able to do that. So Boris, go ahead and show that second video, please. All right, so it just occurred to me that might have been a little bit too dark for some of you to be able to see. So what happened at the end is a guy came in combat fatigues, and that's who all these beers were being poured for, waiting. So obviously the main character is the woman who owns and runs the bar. She's obviously waiting for somebody to come back. At the end, you find out it's this guy who's obviously been away at war. But what else do you know about that guy? Is that her husband, father, brother? Ex-boyfriend, just a regular at the bar? You don't know, do you? But let me ask you this. Are you happy that he's home? Of course you are. And that is why the story can end. Here's the technique, because the audience knows how to feel about what happened in the story. Once the audience knows how to emotionally process what's happened in the story, it's okay to stop telling the story. In other words, you don't have to tie up any other loose ends. And that's where a lot of my audience members get tied up, is at the end of the story, they want to tie up all the possible loose ends in the story. And that makes a great 3-minute story a lousy 7 or 8 or 9-minute story. You need to know how to stop your story. And you can stop once the audience knows how to emotionally process, like not mentally process, because we'll cover that next in questions 7 or 8. But once they know how to feel, you can stop. Now, would it be nice if they tied up some other loose ends? Well, yeah, sure. Like, I'd love to know what happened to all those beers they wasted. And I'd love to know some of the sordid details behind their complicated on again, off again relationship. So there are a lot of loose ends that they could tie up, but they don't have to. And the reason they don't have to is because the audience already knows how to feel about what happened. We're happy that he's home. Fade to black. So that technique will help you keep your stories short. Okay. All right. So now you've answered questions 1 through 6. You haven't answered questions 7 or 8 yet. And the most important thing you can do at this point in a story is to just listen. All right. Presumably you're having a conversation with someone, right? It's a requirement that you let them talk at some point. This is the moment. After you've answered question 6 and before you've talked about 7 or 8, pause and give the story a chance to work. If you've chosen the right story to tell and you've done a halfway decent job of telling it, your audience will already have learned the lesson that you want them to learn, and they will already be motivated to do what you want them to do. So ideally, you never have to answer question 7 or 8 because your audience will answer it for you. In fact, as you're listening, after you've told the story, just listen, let them tell you what they learned and what they're going to go do now. And if they got it right, if they're going to go do what you wanted them to do and they got the right lesson, great, you're done. People are more motivated to pursue their own ideas than they are about your ideas. And that's what storytelling does. It turns your idea into their idea so that you don't have to tell them what to go do. Now it'll be their idea. Now, if they get the answer wrong, that's fine. You can always redirect them. You can always say, you know what, that's an interesting conclusion. I thought about that too, but I came to a different conclusion, and here are my reasons why. Or, that's one next step you could take. I'd recommend something different, and here are my reasons why. Basically, you can always fall back on what you would have said if you weren't going to tell a story. But if you did tell a story, give it a chance to work. Pause after question 6 and see if it worked. Okay. Last thing I want to do, two quick things here at the end. I want to give you a technique or two for creating the right emotional engagement in stories and a technique for creating a surprise ending, because both of those are important. And emotions, I'm going to cover 3 real quickly. First of all, dialogue. Just using dialogue in your stories instead of saying, this happened and then this happened and then this happened and then this happened. So instead of it being just a chronology of events, include, and then he said this, and then she said that, and then he said this, right? People say what they think and feel. The emotions will come out in the dialogue. So don't be afraid to include dialogue in your stories. These other 2 techniques are very easy as well. Tell me and show me. Tell me is the simplest one. It means just name the emotion. I was scared. They were angry. She was frustrated. Just name the emotion and your audience will connect with it. They'll know what emotion's going on because you've told them, okay? Show me is a little bit more interesting and more powerful. So it doesn't mean act it out. This isn't an acting class. It means describe the physical manifestations of the emotions on the main characters. So instead of saying he was angry, say he started yelling. Well, people yell when they're angry. Your audience will figure it out. Instead of saying she was sad, say she started crying. People cry when they're sad, right? Your audience will figure it out. It's far better to have your audience figure out what the emotions are from the clues you're giving them than you just telling them and hitting them over the head with it. So that's actually a more powerful way to create some emotional engagement in stories, which, by the way, is absolutely necessary in a story. You must have some emotional engagement because you remember the reason why storytelling works so well is because it engages the emotional processing part of the brain where decisions are actually made. So if you tell a story that doesn't have any emotional engagement in it, well, you've kind of just wasted your time. You haven't really told a story. Okay, so some of these elements need to be in there. Okay. All right, last technique, creating a surprise. And the most important surprise you'll ever create in a story will be right at the end. Now, if you put it at the beginning, that's good too. That gets people to pay attention. If you put it at the end, it literally, physiologically will make your story more memorable. right? And that happens because when people get surprised, there's a release of adrenaline in their system naturally. Adrenaline is proven to make the memory consolidation process faster and more efficient. So that's the mental process by which something gets transferred from something you see or experience into memory. That memory consolidation process is more efficient and effective when there's a little bit of adrenaline in your system, okay? So you want to trigger the release of adrenaline during a story. It makes it more fun, but more importantly, it literally makes your story more memorable, so people are likely to remember the lesson for a longer period of time. And you may say, well, Paul, there is nothing surprising. There are no surprises in most of my stories, but I can answer the 8 questions, and I might even be able to create some emotion. So can I just skip this part? Well, sure, if you're okay with a mediocre story, but if you want a great story, you're going to want a surprise in it. Everybody knows, great stories have a great, surprise, especially at the end. Well, now you know an additional reason to do it because it literally makes your story more memorable. Now, there are techniques you can use to create a surprise in a story. The folks in Hollywood have figured it out a long time ago, and you can use the same techniques. I just have time today to share one with you, and it's the most important one, okay? It's the most powerful one. So I'm going to give you an example of this technique being used, and then I'll explain how it worked, okay? So there's a 9-year-old boy named James. He's in the kitchen with his mom and his mom's sister. So while 9-year-old James while mom and auntie are at the kitchen table having a cup of tea, James is standing at the stove watching the tea kettle boil. And he's just fascinated with it, right? He's watching this jet of steam come out of the tea kettle, and he's got a spoon. He holds it up there into the jet of steam, and he watches as little drops of water condense on the spoon, and they trickle down into a cup that he's got sitting there so he doesn't make a mess in his mom's kitchen. And he's watching this cycle go over and over and over again, just fascinated with it, steam to water, steam to water. Well, eventually his mother gets bored with him or frustrated with him, and she kind of barks at him. She's like, James, go outside, ride your bike, read a book, do your homework. Aren't you ashamed of yourself just wasting your time staring at the tea kettle boiling? Well, fortunately, young James was undaunted by his mother's admonition because 20 years later, at the age of 29, of course, James Watt reinvented the steam engine, ushering in the Industrial Revolution that we, of course, all benefit from today, and all based on that fascination with steam that he developed at the age of 9 in his mother's kitchen in 1765. Right? Now, unless you're a history buff, to most of you, that was a surprise at the end that it turned out that story was about James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine. Okay, unless you're a history buff, right? Now, to me, the first time I read that story was in a book titled James Watt. It was a biography of the inventor of the steam engine. So, of course, it was no surprise to me at all that the story in chapter 1 about 9-year-old James was about the guy who would grow up to invent the steam engine. But to you, unless you're a history buff, that was probably a surprise. And why was it a surprise? Because I didn't tell you his last name, right? And I didn't tell you the year. So here's the technique. I took 2 small but vital pieces of information that belonged at the beginning of the story, and I didn't give them to you until the end of the story. Presto, surprise ending, okay? And you can do it with almost any story. So I told you the questions at the beginning: who's the main character, where and when did it happen? So I answered part of them, but not all of them. Where and when? I said where, mom's kitchen. When? I didn't tell you. I didn't tell you it was the year. Who's the main character? James. I told you James. I didn't tell you James Watt. So I partially answered those questions, and I didn't finish answering them until the end. And you can do that with almost any story. Take something that belongs at the beginning of the story, using the 8 questions in the right order. Take something that belongs at the beginning, that humans are expecting it to be at the beginning, and don't give it to them until the end. Now, don't take everything and reverse it. Now you've just messed up your story. But if you take 1 or 2 small things and move them, it creates a natural surprise. And so I want to close with this last video, Boris, if I'd have you play it. And I want you to see how they created the surprise at the end of the story using the exact same technique. Go ahead and play it.
dedication, loyalty,
Next week, buddy.
friendship. The choices we make reveal the true nature of our character.
Imagine if this were a true story and you knew those guys and you wanted to tell people what happened. That's not exactly the way you would tell it. You'd probably say something like, hey, there's this buddy of mine named Dave, and well, he was in a car accident a few years ago, so now he's in a wheelchair. But he and his buddies used to play basketball every Thursday afternoon at this gym. So now what they do is they all go rent wheelchairs and they meet him at the same gym at the same time, the same place, and play ball just like they used to. Isn't that awesome? And that's kind of how they told the story, except for one thing. They didn't tell you at the beginning of the story that 5 of those 6 guys didn't need to be in a wheelchair. You didn't find that out until the end when 5 guys stood up and 1 guy did not. Presto, surprise ending. It's the same technique. Take something important from the beginning of the story and don't give it to your audience until the end. And you can do it with almost any story. So we have just a couple of minutes left, and I'd be happy to take any questions, Boris, if you have any that have been sent in or if you have any of your own.
Yep, we have one that I believe is right on spot here for your topic. Just FYI, everyone, the video glitch was on our end. It was not on your end, Paul, so no worries here. Don't worry about it. It was not you. It was us. Sorry, everyone, for that one. But obviously, that video touched absolutely everyone, at least from what I can see on the tablet and in the chat. Paul, we have one question from the audience, and it's related to: is the start of a presentation is the start of a meeting the best moment for someone to share a story?
Yeah, great question. I think the truth is you can tell a story at any point in a meeting and it will be effective. But some of the 2 best places are right at the beginning and right at the end. Okay, there have been a number of studies that show that people tend to remember of an event, whether it was a meeting or a vacation they took or something. They remember the beginning, the end, and the emotional high point of the event. And so those are the most memorable, powerful places that you want to put the things that you want people to remember, the beginning, the end, and then whatever the emotional high point is. And if you tell a good story, that will be the emotional high point. Yeah, good question. Any others you want to chat before we're done?
There is a lot of things happening in the chat, so I would recommend, if you have the time, jump in the Hopin platform then and just engage and interact with the audience, because they're very active in there. So maybe you can add some value also there. We're right on time. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. This was a super, super nice talk, and I hope people understand how practical this talk is. There are people already asking for the deck and whether or not the presentation will be shared. I don't know the answer of that question. Maybe you can answer us very quickly.
Yeah, I'll be happy to send it to you, and then hopefully you can make it available, and it'll have that link in there for those other sales stories I didn't have time to cover. So yes, I can send you all of that.
Correct. We can make it available very, very easily. I just want to remind absolutely everyone, hey, don't forget that we have the recordings coming up tomorrow evening. So immediately after the event, all of the recordings will be up on Hopin for you to check out again and again and again. So you will see them in this replay area that's somewhere on the left-hand side of your screens at Hopin. So again, thank you, Paul, for joining us. It was a pleasure for us to have you.